The parallels between this year's election and the 1968 presidential election are honestly pretty crazy. So I'm going to lay out the situation and you tell me if this sounds familiar. So in 1968, the Democrats were in power during a massively unpopular conflict, the Vietnam War. And during the 1968 election, it was a race between Richard Nixon, a Republican, and Lyndon B. Johnson, a Democrat. And Johnson, like Biden, didn't do very well in the primaries and ended up dropping out of the race to be replaced by his VP, Hubert Humphrey. Humphrey's nomination wasn't voted on by citizens during primaries. He was basically given the nomination, even though 80% of Democrat voters at the time preferred anti-war candidates. Hubert Humphrey refused to break with Johnson's policies about the Vietnam War. And just like the DNC this year, the 1968 Democratic National Convention was met with huge amounts of protest, and even the National Guard was deployed. At the time, Lyndon Johnson's government was working around the clock for a ceasefire deal with the North and South Vietnamese, hoping that it would go through before the election, because Johnson knew that if he could secure an end to the Vietnam War before the election, it would basically guarantee a win for the Democrats. So here's the kicker. Nixon actually sabotaged that deal. Nixon had an ambassador go to the South Vietnamese and basically bribe them to hold off until after the election so that they could supposedly get an even better deal when he was in power. And that actually worked. The South Vietnamese pulled out of the deal at the very last second, and any hope of a ceasefire basically crumbled. The Vietnam War wouldn't end for almost another 10 years. And of course today there are suspicions on the Democrat side that Trump may be colluding with Netanyahu to sabotage the ceasefire deal. What's interesting though is that Lyndon Johnson actually knew what Nixon did. Johnson had the FBI bug Nixon's ambassador's phone, so they knew exactly what happened. There's actually a recorded call with Lyndon Johnson calling Nixon a traitor, but he didn't want to go public with that information because he didn't want to reveal that the FBI were tapping phones, which ironically is the exact thing that Nixon would get impeached for during the Watergate scandal. Anyway, towards the end of the race, Humphrey actually did end up breaking from Johnson's Vietnam War policies, which gave him a big surge in the polls. But in the end, it was too little too late. Nixon ends up winning the election by just 1% of the popular vote. And the reason I bring all this up and why I talk about history in general is so that we can hopefully learn from the mistakes of the past. Because as it is now, Democrats are making the exact same mistakes as they did in 1968 and in 2016. Just a few days ago, Biden warned the Israelis that they would impose an arms embargo if they didn't allow humanitarian aid into Gaza in 30 days, which just so happens to be right after the election. We'll see if that's enough to win, but if it didn't work for Humphrey back then, I don't think it will work now. And as voters, we should ask ourselves, have we really made progress if we're back at the same place as 50 years ago? Why do the Democrats keep making the same mistakes? Are they ineffective or are they complicit? If you like this video, then you will probably like The Conscious Citizens, which is an initiative that my studio has started to make political activism more approachable and inspiring. It's a bi-weekly newsletter curated by us that has political education, inspiring news, and calls to action. It's also an online directory of all the helpful resources and tools we come across that can help us all be more civically engaged. It's free to sign up, and it's also a great way to support our work as well. Also, we're running a fundraiser right now where you can get this shirt that I wear in all my videos, and all proceeds will be going to Palestine. The link to both of those are in our bio.